Okay, welcome to the video on question 4, and you're going to find out this astonishing fact that question 4 is worth a whole quarter of the marks for this entire paper. And it's worth a whole half of the marks available for reading. You have 40 marks available, and there are 20 marks for this question alone. So you're going to get most of your marks here, and this is the question that's going to be the difference between doing well and doing brilliantly. This is the paper I'm looking at. It's a specimen paper because that's all that AQA have published so far, and I've put the link here. I've just copied and pasted it. I don't think you can click on it yet, but you can see the keywords that you'd need to use at AQA to find it. The text of the questions on looks like this. So that's what your exam will look like. That's the first page of the text. I'll leave it here so you can pause it and read it if you like. And then here's the second page. So not a huge amount of detail, and you will have read most of it when answering questions 1, 2 and 3. Question 4 will look like this, and I'm showing you the space that the examiner leaves for you to write. And there's another page, and here is yet another page. And a further one. So we're on to page 12 now. And then finally, let's look at the question in detail. So the first thing I'm asking myself as I get here is, do I have to fill all those pages in order to get the answer? And the answer is no, but I want 20 marks, which is at least 20 minutes of writing. And my exam tactic is going to be to write for that time. So if I can only write one paragraph, okay. But if I can write 5 or 8, then I'll do that. I'll never think, oh, I'll stop because I've done enough. That's simply not the way to get 100%. Okay, there's some very good news in the question. The examiners will always give you a section. So here from line 18 to the end, you don't have to reread the whole thing. They give you a statement which they think is really helpful. So the writer brings very different characters to life for the reader. It's as if you're inside the coach with them, and I've highlighted in 2 different colours the 2 different things I have to look at in my answer. And the good news again is that I'm always asked the extent to which I agree. That's very good news for you because the examiner doesn't want a particular answer. They just want you to answer the question. Are the characters brought to life? I'm talking about inside the coach, so don't write about outside the coach. But the very good news, you can write exactly what you like, agree or disagree. You then have this slightly annoying set of bullet points. The examiner sees these as really helpful, but then says you could write about these, because remember, you can write about what you like. Although this is a very heavy steer, and I think in my tactics here I'm going to try and write about each bullet point. Let's have a look at them. I always underline the keywords so I know what I'm writing about. My impressions of the characters, fine. I've got to evaluate. Now what does that mean? Normally it means weighing things up, looking at 2 different points of view and saying which one's better. And I'm not sure that that's what this means. I think, of course, you can write a single point of view, and it probably just means explain here. But we'll check that when we get to the mark scheme. And then obviously I've got to use quotations. Well, you'd expect that, wouldn't you? What's interesting here is this is just like writing a literature essay. So these are skills which you should have already. These are the clues that I've picked up so far. So 20 marks means 20 minutes. The examiner expected 3 paragraphs for an 8-mark question, so I probably need to write double that, at least 6. And in fact, that would only take me to 16 minutes, wouldn't it? So I ought to add on another 1.5, so probably 8 paragraphs. That's going to mean at least 6 quotations, or more likely 8. Evaluate probably means explain in detail. And one way to do this is to offer alternative interpretations, which I'll try to think about. Previous questions have suggested that the examiner will probably want an overall summary at the beginning. That's something I've stolen from the mark schemes of the previous questions. It's not in the question itself. So please be aware of this. The question won't ask you to do this, but I think it's something that's in the examiner's head and they'll want you to do it. And we'll find out if I'm right at the end of this video when we look at the mark scheme. Right, tactically in the exam, I'm just going to underline everything that makes sense to me as something that I could write about as an impression of the characters inside the coach. Now you can skip this part of the video and go straight to my written answer, but if you stick with this bit, I'm going to explain the thought processes in my head, and you'll notice that I don't really do any writing as I'm reading. The reason for that is this is an exam. I don't want to waste time writing on my exam paper, and also I'll be able to remember it, won't I? The number of highlights I've given you here is to show you that there's always a lot more in this extract that they'll give you than you could possibly write about in the time. And that's great news. It means that you will never run out of things to write about. However, there is a word of warning. I'll always want to make sure that I've covered something from each part of the text, because that will help the examiner see that I've mastered the whole text. And that, of course, is an exam skill. It's got nothing to do with how good I am at English. In fact, the better I am at English, the more I could write about a really small bit. The more I could find to say about this, actually the better student I would be at English, but the lower marks I would get. I have to write about this paragraph and this one, and then there's a further one on the next page as well. So be aware of that exam skill. Right, here's a mad dash then. They're huddled together for warmth. They're a bit like animals. They're exclaiming in unison, so they're acting as one entire body. They're not really individuals. And from here, I'm going to take my argument, which I predict will be the opposite of the examiner's example, that these are not realistic characters at all. They're just there for comic value. One of them is referred to as an old fellow, one old fellow instead of an old man. And because it's not got the word an, we're not really describing him as an individual character. We're describing him as one of the many. He's representing the whole. Another clue that these are stereotypical characters, not real individuals. He's keeping up a constant complaint, so we're obviously invited to look down on him because he's just negative, he's moaning all the time. He seems to overreact, so the writer uses hyperbole here, exaggeration, to show him rising in fury, and then he's fumbling with the window sash. That contrast there tries to make him look like an idiot. The fumbling part shows that his fury isn't really justified. The fact that he can't even open a window sash shows that he's incapable and incompetent, and these things are emphasised with the alliteration of the F in fury and fumbling. He thrust his head out. Again, we've got a really violent verb here. Again, over-exaggerated hyperbole to show that he's being unreasonable and overreacting. And again, he curses the driver in a high, petulant voice. Another use of contrast here where he is like a child, which is contrasted to his old age. Old age ought to bring wisdom, but the opposite has happened. He's become childlike and annoying. And then further hyperbole where he's accusing the poor old driver of being a rogue and a murderer. Completely over the top, but you won't use that word over the top, or those words. You will use the word hyperbole. He accuses the driver of trying to kill them. They're all going to be dead. Again, hyperbolic. And then this delightful bit of irony here. They had no breath left in their bodies, according to the old man, as it was, which is completely disproved by the fact that he's yelling, cursing in this high, petulant voice outside the window of the carriage. Then this old man subsides, wraps himself in a blanket as though to shut himself up, and looks pathetic with the blanket around his knees, and he sinks into his beard and starts muttering into it. And this is a kind of comic figure visually now, as well as in the auditory way, where we've been hearing him before, now we're watching him, and he looks sad and pathetic. We don't sympathise with him, we simply laugh at him. And so again, he's a stereotypical comic turn, if you like, clown figure. He's not a real human being. Now we jump to his neighbour, and she is similarly a figure of fun. So she's a red-faced woman, and the author has deliberately placed her in a blue cloak, which is a clear clash of colours, as you can see, red and blue. They're not complementary at all. And then she behaves almost like an actress on stage, with a wink to anyone who might be looking. And this kind of staginess is, again, hyperbolic, so she's over-exaggerating her own actions for comic effect. And this is Du Maurier saying, look, these characters aren't real, they're just here to amuse you. She jerks her head towards the old man. Again, we've got this violent use of verbs. Even she's making fun of the old man, reminding us of his comic effect. And then she remarked for at least the 20th time, so this factually can't be true. It's got to be over-exaggeration, and the hyperbole there is simply to show us the author's annoyance with her. And also this will be Mary Yellen, who we'll meet in a minute, the main character. It'll be the main character's annoyance at this woman, who again is not a realistic figure. And then we've got this working class register being used here. Daphne du Maurier, obviously a middle class name, would be writing for middle class readers, and she'd use their snobbery to generate amusement at the working class. That it was proper old weather and no mistaking. You can see the way that she's trying to recreate the tone of this person in order to ridicule her. And normally we'd expect characters' words to have speech marks here and here, but because even in Daphne du Maurier's head this isn't a real character, it's not presented as speech. This is just Du Maurier having fun and inviting us through our prejudices as readers in the 1930s to laugh at the working classes. And then she brought out a great hunk of cake, again an image of her greed. She doesn't try to share it out with the other passengers. She's just a comic figure, and she plunged into it. Again, this verb suggesting how greedy she is. Du Maurier might be suggesting that this is a working class trait, with strong white teeth, which again makes her look animal-like, which returns us to this idea at the beginning, you remember. Normally we'd expect people overindulging in cake certainly to have decaying teeth, especially in the 1930s, before proper dentistry and toothpaste. But however, her teeth are still strong because she is animal-like. She's not a realistic character at all. So I'm going to argue that this whole thing is staged in order to contrast these characters with the very real character of Mary Yellen, who's going to be the protagonist. Now, of course, I could have argued just the opposite. I could have shown that these powerful verbs and hyperbole were all aimed at making these characters very realistic. You know, this is exactly how people would behave, caught in a storm, riding in a carriage. There isn't a right answer here. I personally think they're staged, so that's the way I'm going to argue it, but the examiner will do it the other way. And so I hope having both versions will be more useful to you and give you the confidence just to follow your own instinct. So we've nearly finished this analysis. Mary Yellen sat in the opposite corner. This seems to me a deliberate ploy by the writer to have a clear divide between her main character and these stereotypical characters in the coach. Sometimes a cold drip of moisture fell on her shoulder, and so we can start to experience her discomfort and the fact that she ignores it. She brushes it away as though it's not significant with impatient fingers. Perhaps she represents the reader here, desperate to get on with the action. You know, we've had all this description. Let's get some story, Daphne du Maurier. And Du Maurier recognises this and is playing with our expectations here. But remember the question asked me to write about the characters inside the carriage. What the writer does now is it takes us outside the carriage. We're removed from it and then looking in at Mary Yelland, and this is what we see. She sat with her chin cupped in her hands, so we see her gazing out at us, hoping with a sort of desperate interest that some ray of light would break the heavy blanket of sky. Now we've got this glimpse inside the author's head, inside the main character's head, and although she's looking at a trace of that lost blue heaven, in other words, the blue skies, it's a symbolic trace because heaven becomes fortune, her fortune in the future. Is it going to be wealth? Is it going to be marriage to somebody, bearing in mind that this is set in the 1800s? Or is it going to be independence? We don't know. But bringing us inside her mind like this makes us care more about her and is a more realistic portrait of a real human being. So there were 5 paragraphs, and it shouldn't be hard for me to find at least 6 quotations, 1 from each paragraph, and then all my paragraphs have got more than 1 possible quotation in. But as you've seen, there's far more that I notice when I first read it than I could possibly write about, and my exam skill is going to be to make sure that I link my ideas together. I start with that overall summary of what the impression is, and I make sure that I get things from each part of the passage. So here I start with that summary statement. The overall impression is of completely unrealistic characters who are stereotypes. The writer wants us to find them amusing and encourages us to sneer at them. Consequently, I'm using the connective here to link my ideas together. They're described as 1. Huddled together for warmth, perhaps like animals. We look down on them when they are represented by one old fellow whose words are intended to amuse us. So I'm always thinking about the effect on the reader in order to answer the question. The use of one rather than an is intended to suggest he is one of them, the passengers, so that his stupidity reflects theirs. The writer emphasises this by deliberately distancing her main character Mary from them. Consequently, she is in the opposite corner. And again, I'm using this connective to link my ideas together so the examiner can see that I'm building an argument here. This suggests she would rather not be in the coach, so again I'm talking about the effect, and this tells the examiner I'm talking about the effect, with these passengers. The fellow ridiculously expresses fury and simultaneously fumbled, the alliteration of F reminding us of his foolishness. You'll notice that I'm using very short quotations, only the number of words I need to make my point. That's called integrating quotations, and helps the examiner see my skill as a writer, even though I've clearly forgotten the speech marks there, and that should really be a comma. We are encouraged to ridicule him because he shouts at the driver, accusing him of over-dramatically of being a murderer. This hyperbole is made to look stupid when he claims the passengers had no breath in their bodies, even while he disproves this himself, yelling out of the carriage window. Now I want to show the examiner that all my points show the characters are not realistic, they're comic figures. The next character is also introduced as a comic figure. Her language is consequently deliberately working class. It was proper old weather and no mistaking it. The deliberate lack of speech marks suggests even the writer knows this is not a real conversation, but more like an actor on stage. This impression is also emphasised by her wink to anyone who might be looking. You'll notice that every time I quote, I try and integrate it into my sentence, so it's a part of the sentence. Hyperbole is also used to show Mary's and perhaps the writer's impatience with her, as she repeats herself for at least the 20th time. Their appearance is also made to seem ridiculous, so the fellow muttered in his beard, and the woman wears a blue cloak, which so obviously clashes with her red face. Again, you can see how I'm working hard to get these little quotations to fit into my sentences. We do identify with Mary, which is why she is named. However, we are far from inside the coach. Instead, we view her through the window, sat with her chin cupped in her hands, dreaming of escape. Rather than glimpsing inside the coach, we see into her mind. And so here, with the final sentence, I've tried to use the words of the question to bring everything round to that original question. And this is my kind of summary, or my conclusion, if you like. Examiners like that because you round off your answer. It gives it a sense of completeness, a sense that you're in control of the interpretations that you're putting forward. Right, it's time to see how this exam answer might be assessed. And what's really interesting are these 5 bits of advice that the exam board gives to its examiners. So let's have a look. Refer constantly to the mark scheme. In other words, an examiner isn't going to be able to decide just on gut instinct. There are rules in the marking that they're going to have to follow. And then here's an interesting idea. Always credit accurate, relevant and appropriate answers which are not given in the mark scheme. Now, the fact that this has to be told to examiners is a really clear indication to you that that doesn't always happen. And this is why examiners need reminding. And that's why it's always worth appealing if you don't get the marks that you think you deserve. And here again, use the full range of marks. A lot of examiners say, well, I can't give 100% because that's just too high. But what they're forgetting is that these candidates are only 16 years old. You know, you're not after perfection. You're just after something that's very good. Don't hesitate to give full marks when the answer merits them. And that's another clue that examiners are focused on perfection rather than thinking what a 16-year-old could reasonably do. And that's again another clue to you that you ought to appeal if you're not satisfied, especially as this question carries so many marks. The advice to the examiners is quite full, as you can see. I'm not going to deal with all of this page, but I am going to take you down to this bit that I've highlighted in blue. The sample response in each content descriptor column not intended to be complete, full or model answers, and that's what we're going to find here. That's not very helpful, but the mark scheme is written for the examiners. It's not really written for students. Which is why you need to really familiarise yourself with the mark scheme and get on top of it. Hopefully this video will really help you. Here we are then with the most important part of the mark scheme, and this is what the examiner uses to first decide what level of answer you have. And it's only after they've looked at this that they then look at the example answers. Have I critically evaluated the text in a detailed way? Yes, I have been detailed, and I have a feeling that the examiner will equate being detailed with evaluating. In other words, they're not really looking in evaluation for 2 different interpretations that you have to resolve. Offers examples from the text. Well, if you constantly quote, like I have with short quotations inside your sentences, and then you'll definitely do that. And have you been convincing? Well, that's really an impression that the examiner has. It's really up to the examiner to decide that. However, if you've been detailed and you're putting forward an argument, then the chances are you will have been convincing. And so hopefully my answer has been convincing in saying that the characters are stock, stereotypical characters. They're not like real people. analyses the effects of a range of writers' choices, and to do that you really have to use the word writer, or the name, du Maurier here, in order to signpost to the examiner that you're actually thinking about the writer's reasons for doing what they're doing. Selects a range of relevant quotations. Well, that's exactly the same as the examples here. So really, this just tells you need lots of quotations to deal with them in detail. Can you show that you're being convincing? Yes, if you keep using the word consequently, that is your signal to the examiner that you're convincing them with your argument. So very simple techniques for this question. Right, next they go to the content descriptor to decide where you fall within the level, what mark you're going to get within that level. Let's have a look. We might think that the passengers are a unified group because the writer refers to them collectively. The few passengers huddle together for warmth, but their actions suggest how different they are. The old fellow is short-tempered and pompous, with a sense of his own importance, but also ridiculous in his actions. So here you've got several points made about the old fellow, and none of them are backed up yet with a quotation. That's a sort of dangerous sort of tactic, and the examiner is now going to back it up with quotations, I hope. The writer's choice of the word petulant shows how his behaviour was childish. He also makes rash statements that he would never travel by coach again, which the reader knows is of no interest. So he's commenting, or she's commenting, on the effect on the reader by deliberately mentioning that. In the end, he is reduced to muttering. These complexities help the reader, again commenting on the effect on the reader, understand the stresses of the journey and the different sides to the man. So here, the examiner is actually trying to find vaguely different interpretations by suggesting that the man is complex. However, I think you'd also get the marks by looking at the intentions of the author instead of looking at the complexity of a character. But it's not really that helpful to you as a candidate, is it? Firstly, it only looks at one character, so you don't see how many characters you need to mention. It's only an indication of the way to write about a character rather than the whole answer. And there is no overall judgment, which remember I suggested you needed at the beginning of your answer. And nor is there any agreement or disagreement with the statement in the question. And I've asked here, why not? Are the exam board deliberately not trying to help you here? No, I don't think they are doing it deliberately. I just think it's incompetence. And I'll make another video with some supplementary material that the exam board has offered, which will hopefully clear this up. For now, it might be helpful to look at a level 3 answer. So here it is. The writer brings the characters alive by making them behave and react differently. The old fellow from Truro loses his temper with the driver, but makes things worse for everybody by opening the window and bringing a shower of rain on himself and his fellow passengers. This amuses the reader because the man is angry and foolish. So this is answering the question, the effect on the reader. We also understand the irony of his actions. Now, irony is normally an indication of being in the top band, and how pointless it is cursing the driver, who the reader knows is doing his best. The writer makes the man seem unreasonable and out of control by the use of excessive, almost violent words like rogue and murderer. Now, this is where we're stuck with the subjectivity of an examiner. When I read this, I don't see a drop in class. I personally can't see why this is worth fewer marks than the answer I've just read. The only difference I can find is that this candidate here has not used the word complexity. This is a very mechanistic approach, but I would strongly suggest that you try and introduce this word complexity or complex into your answer to force the examiner to decide that you're evaluating. And once again, this is why you really ought to appeal if you don't get the results that you want. You know, I've got an English degree, I'm studying this, and I can't for the life of me see why this answer here isn't as good as the one I read out before. In my next video, I'll introduce a candidate's actual answer with their actual marks, which should help us uncover a little more clearly exactly what you need to do to get the top marks for this question.